Everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. I'm Pastor Megan in San Francisco. Today I'm in my kitchen because at Grace Lutheran, where I'm the pastor, there is a summer musical camp, and they're doing Disney musicals, so there's no way we can have that music in the background and ever afford that. It'd totally get taken down from YouTube. So enjoy my kitchen. We worship every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. if you ever want to stop by when you're in San Francisco. And
I think that hearing the Disney music would be awesome. Now that I know why.
The rights are expensive.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Darn it. Okay. So I am Pastor Dan Tisdale. I am not in San Francisco. I am in Gypsum, Colorado. Gypsum, Colorado is in the mountains of Colorado, about halfway between Denver and Utah. We're near Vail. We have worship at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, and we have lots of other things going on through the week, and you can find out what those things are on our Facebook page or our web page, which are both First Lutheran of Gypsum, all one word. My sermons have been recorded or being recorded, so you can listen to any of my sermons. And they're all awesome. There's never a bad sermon. And blog posts and events. We were in a parade last weekend. We won third place in the parade with a boat that looks like our church that I built by myself. So that's where we are.
Fun.
Come visit.
We marched in the parade too. We marched with the SFPD, and my kids had cat masks on because they are foster kids. So if you hear a kid screaming at any point or trying to get in the locked door, it's because they are a foster kid and they cannot be on the live stream. So protecting their confidence. This Sunday, we have some very unique Bible readings that are happening. It happens to be one of my least favorite gospel readings, but Dan likes it, so he's going to put up a counter argument for it. It's a section of Matthew that's a little bit doom and gloom. It's a weird time in the church year because we're celebrating Jesus rising from the dead, but there aren't that many Bible readings about Jesus rising from the dead, so we've kind of read them all. So now we're going back to all the grumpy things Jesus said before he died on the cross. And so it's weird to be in the post-Easter season in the church, but also be reading Bible texts from before Jesus died on the cross. So the reading from Matthew, which if you're on the justlutheran.blogspot.com, you can find below the video down here, is one that features an oft-quoted Bible verse talking about taking up your cross. And so the idea is that the time after Jesus' death, when these texts were written, it was a time when people were highly persecuted. They were being murdered, literally murdered, for at least 328 years. And so it was like a pep rally for people who were going to be Christian, even though people were going to be mean to them and murder them. And so this take up the cross idea can be fantastic. It's also been used in really super terrible ways, like when people are trying to say, God loves everybody except for you. And so you should take up your cross and stop being who you are to be who I could like you as. And so I've experienced discrimination and had people say hateful things using things like, take up your cross, just take up your cross, hate the sin, not the sinner, take up your cross, do it. And so living in a world, I live in a very crazy world. San Francisco's got a lot of people in it. I went to some multiple casualty shootings and do some work with the police department. If you watch CNN, it's very chaotic and terrible. And I feel like at this, where we are in current church history, is there are a lot of people telling you turn or burn. So the message, in the Middle Ages, people had heard over and over and over again, turn or burn, right? Everything you do is going to make you die. And when you die, God's going to be mad at you because everything is terrible. And so they were in a point in history when they needed someone to say, grace can be easy. You can sin boldly and you can believe more boldly still. And grace is a good counterbalance to this idea that you just have to suffer all the time. I think we're in a similar time period where there's a lot of doom and gloom and terror and fear circulating in our world. And so I am a pastor who is counterbalancing with that same kind of grace and hope and love, and erring on the side of telling people to get the heck off the cross. I believe that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection on the cross means that the cross has a no vacancy sign, meaning Jesus is on it, you can't get on it because it's full. And it'd be weird if you climbed on a cross Jesus was already on. And so I think just logistically it would be problematic, unless you're on the back and still. So I think that we are in a time where we should get off our crosses. We should suffer less. There are a lot of people who argue that you should throw yourself into danger, that you should become vulnerable because that will somehow help the oppressed get a better way of life, that you should do terrible, harmful things to your own body because other people suffer. And I believe that there is enough depression, there's enough suicide, there are enough people who try to make the hurts of their being on the outside of their body by harming themselves, that we don't need that message right now from church pulpits. In other spaces in the world where they are more comfortable and they need to get off their thrones and get closer to a cross, like if it's a spectrum between sitting on a throne and enjoying all your money, and then over here is like getting on a cross and totally suffering, my hope is that people will kind of meet in the middle. Like those who are on their cross, get off of it and head this way towards some self-care. People who are on a throne and have no idea about what suffering's like in the world, head this way a little bit, suffer a little more so that you can care for other people. I'm not the 1%, nor do I hang out with the 1% very often, so I don't get to preach get off your throne very often. And so this particular text, take up your cross and follow me, isn't super appealing. I think that yes, while it's true that we learn things from suffering, I don't think we should run towards it for fun. Most of the justice work I do is so that other people won't have to suffer in the ways that I did. And if the ultimate goal is for there to be less suffering in the world, telling people to run towards suffering is cuckoo-cuckoo. Unless you're a first responder, then thank you for running towards danger and making me safer. Anyway, Dan, why do you love Take Up the Cross?
Man, you just set me up, like tee it up.
No,
I agree with everything
like this verse, and you've been thinking about it.
I've been preaching on it. I don't disagree with anything that you've said. Where I have a counter
study.
Where I have a counter argument, it has more to do with what that means, what taking up your cross itself means. Does it mean, to me it means sacrifice, but not in the same way. Not sacrificing your life, although Christ sacrifices life. I think part of the decline in the church today has to do with people taking the easy way out with faith, especially, with Lutherans. We have that habit of although the epistle lesson for this Sunday has to do with for grace by faith, and the whole Lutheran message of you don't have to do anything. But I think we've taken that, and not just Lutherans, we've all taken that almost too much to heart. And that is, I don't have to do anything. I'm going to sit back and go to church. I'm not going to be the church. It's about being a disciple in the world and taking care of other people. If you read the Gospels and you really listen to what Jesus specifically asked us to do, it's not a difficult message. It's very straightforward, but it's not easy, right? This is something that comes up. This one phrase comes up in my sermons a lot. It's simple, but it's not easy. And I think we've become a little bit too comfortable in our churches. So what the gospel, to me, what that phrase "take up your cross" is about, sacrifice, not sacrifice to. And I think when you talk about get off your throne and take up your cross, being somewhere in the middle, I think in both cases there's to get off your throne requires sacrifice, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes sacrifice is, I mean, I think, at least in the churches that I've been a part of, there's not enough sacrifice of time, of energy, of money, of health. And I don't mean hurt yourself. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking, like I mentioned earlier, I was in a parade, and there's, from the perspective of the parade, it's great to give out things, but it's get up early, get dirty and sweaty and sunburned and in 100-degree heat, and there's like, yeah, there's the reward of seeing happy children when you give them ices on a hot day, but in terms of it, there was definitely a lot of sacrifice on my day off to walk in a parade, on a hot parade. But when we talk about these 4 weeks, are called the mission discourses, and it's all about what we're called to do. It starts with the Great Commissioning, and it goes all the way through to this week, and it's all about, you're not supposed to be sitting on your hands as a Christian. You're supposed to be going out into the world, and it says the very first week is go out and preach the gospel and baptize, and people think, well, that's the pastor's job, but that's the problem. A lot of churches are letting the pastors be the job of the disciple when we're all called to be disciples. And preaching the gospel doesn't mean standing on a corner yelling scripture and judging people. It means handing out ices on a hot day at a parade, or
Unless
loving
you're Jeremiah.
people. Huh?
Unless you're Jeremiah.
Unless you're Jeremiah, right? But sacrifice, I mean, I'm gonna just put this whole thing on its ear. The Old Testament lesson, Hebrew Bible lesson, is the Abraham being told to sacrifice his son Isaac. And God said, sacrifice your son. People say, well, that's a cultural thing, like that would never happen today. And I'm not suggesting anybody sacrifice, I mean, I know it even happens in some cult kind of places, like, well, really it takes actual sacrifice of your life. I'm not talking about that. Please don't get me wrong. But God wants all of us, all of ourselves. And it doesn't mean that we can't live our lives the best we can, but our faith has to take more precedent than it does right now. I had somebody say that, I had an argument with somebody yesterday who I adore, who said, I just don't have time to make a phone call or a card to someone in the hospital. I just don't have time. And I said, I think of it like I think of my personal giving to the church. I make in the area I live in is one of the highest wealth. Meg and I both live, and we live in 2 of the top 5 living in the country. I think like 3 and 5 or something. It's super expensive to live here. I live paycheck to paycheck, and it's really tough. But I set aside my giving first. I said, okay, here's what I'm giving the church first. In terms of how I budget, I can't afford to give what I give to my church and financially. But I do that because I do that first, and everything else is what I live off of. I feel that same way about time and sacrifice to our faith. It doesn't mean, like, some people think that means just holding bulletins at church. I'm like, no, it means maybe preaching the gospel is helping someone get their groceries out to their car. I mean, or like preaching, like it's that kind of time. It may be folding bulletins at church, but I think people have gotten too comfortable, and being a Christian at its core isn't comfortable. If you're comfortable as a Christian, I think you're doing it wrong. Yeah. So to me, picking your cross is about sacrifice, at least a little bit, and you may have to stop and give of yourself to someone else, to a stranger. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. Love your enemy. These are things that are countercultural and sacrificial. And to me, that's taking your cross.
Yeah, and I think the idea of sacrificing a child is crazy town. First of all, I want to say again this year that if you read texts about sacrificing Isaac in front of children, you are doing church wrong. That's a terrible text to read in front of children. Additionally, it's interesting because in the biblical story, when Abraham has to go and sacrifice Isaac, it's after he's already listened to Sarah's idea about getting rid of Isaac and Ishmael and sending them into the desert. And I wonder if
Hagar and Ishmael. You said Isaac and Ishmael. Hagar and Ishmael.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Hagar and Ishmael. And I wonder if there is. I mean, we kind of think of the story as like God being like, and now I'm going to take your child away. And I wonder if there is something about God helping Abraham understand that every person is important, even if you have assigned them different categories, right? Because technically Ishmael is the child with a slave, right? And in texts where Jesus is talking about slaves are not better than their master and masters are not better than their slaves, there is something to this idea that if you are willing to cast off someone who is more vulnerable and leave them in the desert to die and to starve to death and not have enough to drink, if you're willing to say one of your children is less than another one of your children, maybe God is trying to prove the point that like that's not acceptable. How you treat the worst that you have ranked is how I'm going to treat the best that you have ranked. And this idea that God is trying to teach us to stop having these hierarchies of who's more important, of who's more blessed, of who is a closer child of God. And it's not stated explicitly in the text, but it would be one of the only reasons I can think of that God would tell Abraham to kill his own child and have it be a justice message at the end, right? Because it really is kind of a terror. Let's just see how obedient you are if it's not some sort of justice lesson. So that's the only way I can tease a justice lesson out of that one.
Well, and I had a sort of a spirit moment last weekend. I preached at two churches. I preached at my church. I preached at the Methodist church. And there were two alternate texts there were two choices for the Old Testament text. And my church had chosen one text, and the Methodist church chose the other text. And the other text is the fairly short passage of Hagar and Ishmael out of the wilderness, and they're she leaves Ishmael under a bush to die, and she sits a ways off, and they're both going to die. And Hagar is promised by God in that passage, "You're not going to die. Mm-hmm. You're going to have a great nation." And I wasn't nothing from my sermon related to that at all. But I stopped and I said, you know, when we talk about passages like this, we forget that this is the story that Islam uses for the founding of Islam. Mm-hmm. There are people in our culture that want to marginalize Muslims, Islamic people. There's a new law for the travel ban that's doing this week. Mm-hmm. When we don't realize that we literally worship the same God. And God, our God in the Bible says, no, these people are precious.
Right.
In our Bible, our God says Muslims are precious. And there are brothers and sisters. So let's stop with that crap. And the justice issue, I'm not very good normally at bouncing around between different lessons on a Sunday when we do these Bible studies. But for some reason, it's all clicking for me today.
Sure.
The Romans text, which is quoted a lot of, it talks. Well, you mentioned the slavery. There's slave words in there. It talks about you were once slave to sins, but now you're slaves to righteousness. And righteousness is a churchy word. And what is that? How does that translate today? It means justice. It means grace. It means taking care of other people. Justice is the best word. So if we use that for the whole sacrifice thing, you were once a slave to doing whatever you wanted to do.
That's right. That's right.
And now you're a slave to, if we put that blank on everything, then the gospel's not so bad to me.
I suppose. I suppose. There's an interesting quote that's going around Facebook this week, and it's from Bishop Yvette Flunders, and it's about racism and slavery, and it feels particularly relevant to the readings this week, and it's directed, excuse me, towards people who are racist or who are trying to make policies to get rid of certain kinds of people, and so Yvette Flunders' quote is, "If you didn't want us in your country, you should have picked your own cotton." And right? So it's this idea that when you participate in an act of injustice, when you even systematically participate in an act of injustice, whether it's by being in the United States with this legacy of racism, whether it's being a part of kind of how do we decide how healthcare works, who are the winners, who are the losers, how many people should have healthcare, how important do you have to be to me economically for me to think $5 is enough for you to be alive, right? Okay, but what if it's $100? Okay, but what if it's $1,000? Okay, would I spend $10,000 for you to be alive? Like when we are in a time when we're having these kinds of weighted decisions, that comment, what it talks about is that if you make me dependent upon you through injustice, right? If we have created an unequal system, then we have a responsibility to be a part of the justice in the future. And so I think in the Romans text, in the Isaac text, in these conversations about what God is thinking about in terms of like, who do we have to take care of? Who's my brother? Who's my child? Who should I save and who should I kill? In the midst of this conversation, we have this really convoluted idea and radical idea that's happening in Romans. Romans says basically that God's law that was written on stone, like unerasable stone, is more like something a child would write on an Etch-a-Sketch and erase, right? God can summarily dismiss the fact that you didn't follow any of the rules. Now, does this mean you should not like the rules and be happy about it? Romans says no, Luther says yes, right? So pick the person you want to follow on that. But God is rewriting the way the relationship works, right? So it makes no bonkers sense. It makes no sense, right? God is saying, follow my rules, do justice, take care of people who are less than you. But if you don't, I'm going to love you anyway. I'm going to know the number of hairs on your head. I'm going to like count you as precious. You're going to reap the consequences of that. There's going to be injustice everywhere. I hope you'll do good stuff, but if you don't,
I'll still love you.
Like it's a weird, like that. Anyone who is a parent knows that never works. Did you know you could go to bed right now? I really hope you go to bed right now. If you don't go to bed right now, 0 consequences for not going to bed right now, right? Which child goes to bed? None of them. So it's an interesting dynamic that this parent creator God has in relationship to our lives, and it definitely leads to frustration, because if you were the sibling who God said, go to bed or no TV, go to bed or no books, go to bed or you're in real big trouble. And now God says, go to bed, but if you don't, no consequences. Right? We are people who want our neighbors to have the same punishments as us. We are people who want dissertations to be just as hard as when we went through school, because otherwise it doesn't mean nothing. We are people who are mad when someone else goes through an orange light and thinks we should be forgiven when we do it because we put our hand up and we waved, right? So
we're mad. We're mad when we find out that other people might get a free seminary education and we had to borrow enough that we'll be paying it for the rest of our lives.
That's right, right? So we are weird people who are still trying to work out our feelings about that. And God's promises don't make any darn sense. It doesn't make sense. How can God be a God who can give us justice and be a God who says to the oppressors, even if you don't bring justice to people, I'm still going to love you, right? So that makes for a squirrely world. But it also makes for a conversation about God that's maybe more honest than pretending like God's only always good, or that God's not complicated, or that God's only got white skin, right? Because these biblical stories are gritty, and that's why someone could make it their profession to talk about them every day for 40 years as a career, hopefully, because there's enough details in them that we can like learn stuff about justice. Whether or not it works, your guess is as good as mine. I know that when I have a parking ticket for just being slightly over the time, because I got there right when the person was writing the ticket, I want the judge to have an Etch-a-Sketch, not a stone tablet. And so it's hard because we want an Etch-a-Sketch in relationship to our own failings, and we want stone tablets when it comes to other people's. And
exactly. Yeah.
how do we live in the world? And both Moses and Jesus are in our Bible, and how do we honor both?
Yeah.
I don't know. Justice is hard. Love is harder. And my hope is that we'll err on the side of compassion, that we'll err on the side of caring for the vulnerable, and that we'll err on the side of giving ourselves self-care, because if we don't have self-care, we will not be able to care for the vulnerable at all.
But it actually takes caring. It actually takes time and energy, like both for yourself and for other people. That's I think part of the lesson that I'm getting out of this, that I'm trying to give through my preaching, is that all of that, even self-care, takes time. Self-care takes time, and caring for the vulnerable takes time and energy. It takes sacrifice. And if you're not doing it, then what the heck is the church for? You know?
That's right. And Dan and I have both spent time in San Francisco, either sleeping on the streets or following shelter hours, and we know how hard it is when you are unable to sleep enough, unable to eat enough, unable to think enough, and you have a complete lack of an ability to have self-care. And the reason that we do that is not to pretend like we're homeless. It's maybe not even to learn what it's like to be homeless. But most importantly, it's to learn how to be nice when you are so entirely depleted of self-care that it's impossible to be nice. And so as pastors, that's what we strive for. We're not always perfect at it. We get stressed out too. We say dumb things at parties too, like we're human beings, and to expect us to always say the right thing and to always be kind and to know what feels kind to other people, when people can take what they dish and when they can't, is an impossible standard. But we strive mightily to be people who, when someone's yelling at you, we respond with kindness. And we strive mightily to be people who, when there's injustice everywhere, we still respond the most just choice that we have. You'll find that pastors are strange people. In the midst of Nicaragua, where they don't have garbage cans, we will keep the trash in our pockets rather than add to the litter on the streets. It makes no sense, but that's kind of the way that we try to be in the world. And I think that's what Christians are called to do and called to be. It's not always possible when you work in a corporate job. It's not always possible when you work in a political job, because how it looks on TV might be more important than doing the most justice at any given moment. And so it's a hard, complicated world that we all live in. But that's where I think this idea that God is trying to do the best for us, even though what we want in our own hearts from God is super convoluted and silly.
Right.
Yeah. The end.
Amen. Drop the mic.
Bible study endeth. And hopefully, sorry we've been away for a little while. Hopefully we'll be back last week. Since I'm on call with the police department, if an emergency happens, I might miss you, but maybe I'll teach Dan how he can do it by himself. That would be fun.
Oh, no.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.